Today's topic is called Why You Need to Be Exploited to Succeed. It really actually could be a different topic. This is just a name to get interest. But really what this is about providing a lot more value than other people do. And it's something that the best attorneys do and that a lot of people don't really realize is a key to success. I'm going to tell quite a few stories, give you guys some insight into that. But I work with a lot of attorneys privately and several have very large books of business and are very successful. And I've personally worked with a lot of attorneys when I was working that are very successful. And I try to look at what makes people get successful, what makes them stay successful. And this is one of the things that I think is going on in the background that is extremely important. So a lot of people, especially sometimes even young attorneys, but even older attorneys, one of the things that holds them back quite a bit, I believe, is that they tend to look at when they're working with people or working for people, whether it's a client or an employer, they tend to worry about whether or not they're getting taken advantage of, whether or not they're giving too much of themselves for the employer, whether or not that they can be paid more for what they're doing, or whether or not they're giving too many hours and that sort of thing. And this is actually very common. A lot of people will look at it as a game where they're giving as little of themselves as possible and trying to get paid as much as possible for what their time. And they're continually evaluating jobs and employers based on this particular metric. And that's something that I believe really prevents many people from settling down and having very effective and good careers. They do that with clients. They do that kind of with everything that they do. And everything is an evaluation of whether or not they're giving as little as they possibly can to get as much as they possibly can. And a lot of times people will go in-house because of this, making this calculation. Other people will become solo practitioners and attempt to do this with people. And then when they do it, they tend to have to do it with small clients they can push around. And then a lot of people even quit because they feel that the system is bad. And so this is a tension that's going on in the background with most attorneys that I've seen and is constantly there. And it's not something that I believe in. The most successful attorneys, and what they're doing is they're really trusting that the system will take care of them. They believe that if they do their best and give their best and they come at it with a good spirit, that everything is going to work out for them. In all organizations, in law firms, employment organization, there's always a conflict going on between advancing those who are really giving their all in providing more value than they're receiving, and then holding back those who don't. And most people, I believe, that are held back because of their fear that if they give too much, they won't get certain things. And a lot of them have a paranoia that they're going to be exploited in relationships and professional and personal relationships and whatever else you do. And in a lot of cases, partners in large law firms, they will switch firms every few years because they believe that they're not being paid enough and that they're being exploited. And so they'll move. So this isn't something that happens just with young attorneys or associates. It's very common among partners. Like they're worried that they're giving too much. And when they're giving too much or giving too much of the amount of money they bring in, then they leave firms. And so there's lots of partners and stuff that are constantly moving around doing that. A lot of associates believe that they work too many hours and they're giving too much. And they look for a boutique firm or something where the workload is less, even if they believe that the pay will stay the same. So this is just always going on in the background. Then many associates, of course, a large number of them do not become partners right away or in the law firms that they want to initially. And they don't understand that they're not providing more value than they're taking. And the whole calculation of rising in a law firm, succeeding in a law firm, or in any business is really about providing more value than your peers, and whether it's in hours or in business or whatever. And those are the people that do well and rise to the top. And the people that don't provide more value are the ones that generally end up having problems. Many people are, like I said, are looking for shortcuts, and they're looking for ways that they believe that they can make as much money or they can work the least amount they possibly can to avoid getting taken advantage of. There's nothing wrong with that. Everyone has self-interest, you have self-interest, and everybody wants to maximize what they do and get the most for what they're doing. And an example would be if you're working at a law firm, the law firm comes along and doubles your salary, and that's something to seriously think about. There's nothing wrong with that. But the point is that when you're constantly calculating everything that you give in exchange for what you might receive, that's going to hurt you. It doesn't, it's a total outlook in terms of the way you do things and the way you interact with people and the way you're doing your job that is going to have major ramifications. And employers avoid people that try to provide less value. Even in personal relationships, people avoid those sort of people. The person that doesn't give is typically alone. They don't work, they're unhappy, and they're takers and not givers. And one of the things that I've always noticed is I have volunteered in homeless shelters. I've employed people that come off the street and so forth, and worked with people that have had problems with different things. And in most cases, when you really get down to it, people that are isolated, people that are having problems staying employed, or a lot of times getting jobs, and that are unhappy, a lot of that unhappiness is because they're afraid to give, and they don't give as much of themselves as they can, because the more you're giving and the more you're solving other people's problems and the more you're helping others, the more the world gives back to you. And that's just something that is very true, and it's a universal law. Different religions preach that in different ways, and it really does come down to a work thing. I think there's a prayer that I heard recently, the St. Francis prayer, which is, this is not a religious presentation. I'm just giving you an example of a religion that says that. And so the idea is you want to give as much value, and you want to be someone that's solving problems and not someone that's worrying about helping others. And there's a face cream that I use. There's a saying on it. It's right on the cover, and it says, "Life takes from the taker and gives to the giver." And I believe that's actually true. I believe people that I've seen that have the most problems in their lives and their careers are takers, and they try to take everything that they can while giving as little as they can. And the people that do the best in their personal lives and also in their work lives are givers. Changing your mindset to being a giver is one of the most important possible things that you can do, because the more you give, the more will come back to you. And the more you concentrate on providing value to other people and helping people with advice or solving problems or working hard for your employer or thinking harder and seeing solutions where other people just gloss over things, is going to make a huge difference in your life and your career. Like I said, I mean, most people that have issues in their personal and financial lives believe a lot of times that people will take advantage of them if they give too much. And the secret to being really good at something is having much more to offer than providing more than anyone else does. It's like that when people are applying to schools. If you have the highest grades and you have the best test scores and you went to the best college and you have the most extracurricular, that's providing more of a person that is highly qualified to a school than it is someone that isn't. But it's just, you're showing that you have a history of working harder or being smarter or whatever. But that's how the world works. And that's why schools are important. That's why firms can be important, and all sorts of things. So I know a man that retired in his mid-50s, and I met him a long time ago. His belief was, I remember talking to him, was that women in relationships should be equal contributors, meaning everything had a quid pro quo. So if one person paid for dinner one time, the other person paid for it that time, and everything was measured and calculated. This man had this idea of everything. Everything had to be measured. He would always try to get the most out of various situations. Ultimately, had no consistent relationships, no lonely life, because every interaction was measured, and whether it was affection or money or time or whatever, everything had a quid pro quo. And that's a way of thinking that not a lot of people have, but some people do. And evaluating what you give in these terms leads to problems and many issues. If you are able to give more than you take and provide extra value, then that's going to be helpful. A lot of times when in legal matters, there's very quick and easy solutions. I would say that a good percentage of the attorneys that I've worked with in the past And when I say good percentage, I'd say over 50% will look at business that comes in as a way to try to extract money. And even if they could solve a problem very quickly, they would try to maybe extend it a little bit or a lot. That doesn't do clients very good. And the clients ultimately will try to avoid attorneys like that. And it's the struggle about people that aren't giving a lot and people that are is happening every day. And there's always a struggle in every employer about people that are trying to do as little work as possible, give as little as possible. And it's something that I'm sure that you can see around yourself, like when you're working, and it's everywhere, and it's not a good thing. So I recently took a vacation. I'm just going to give you some quick examples because I could talk about these kind of examples all day with people that I work with, but I want you to see how this operates around you and how it even operates around me. And so I recently went on vacation, and before I left, there's a maintenance man who works in my house, and he offered to take care of my dogs and stay in my house while I was gone. And he typically works at the house 3 days a week. During those 3 days, he has various tasks. I live on the beach, so there's like painting that needs to be done all the time because things rust, and washing things off. But anyway, he works 3 days a week. And so I asked him to work on some ongoing work while I was gone. He told me he could stay in my house and watch my dogs. And I also have some turtles, and what else do I have? A parrot, and I don't know, some hamsters for my kids. But anyway, so I asked him to watch all this, and he said that he would do all that stuff. And what he did is he stayed in my house, but for the days I was gone, that he was supposed to be working, but he didn't do any of the work he was supposed to. Instead, he lounged around the house all day and watched TV, walked on the beach, and didn't work. And he justified not working. And he actually went out and worked for someone else during the day, and then would come home at night and take care of the dogs. He justified that taking care of the dogs was a fair trade. And so that's an example of someone worried about being taken advantage of because he took the dogs out and walked them in the morning and night. He was worried that if he did more, he would be taken advantage of. So then he worked 2 jobs. So that's an example. And then when I was on vacation, I met a couple that had come close to divorce in the past year. The husband hadn't been working, decided that he wanted to find himself, and so he'd stop working. And then the wife had become the breadwinner and was taking all these side jobs and doing all these things, working extra hours. So because the man didn't want to work. And she felt that he needed to go back to work, and she felt taken advantage of and exploited, which is probably a fair approximation. One person felt taken advantage of by the other. And that these kind of things happen all the time in relationships. And then on another vacation I took not too long ago, I rented a house to stay in. The house had a concierge, and there was just all sorts of things, that happened. One person we bought a $30 bottle of champagne, and then they didn't buy that brand. They bought another brand that they said was $100 a bottle, but it was actually $60 a bottle, and they inflated the cost. And just all sorts of things like that happened where one side was trying to take advantage of the other and providing less value than we paid for. And the same thing with a massage. We were charged $170 an hour for massages, which is far more than we pay in the US. And there's tips put in. Then we went to a hotel pool that was in this community, and we were told we needed to pay in cash. And I learned later that there's a thing that goes on in a lot of third world countries sometimes where they say the credit card machine's broken, you pay in cash, and they keep the money. So that kind of happened where someone that was working there was stealing from the hotel and also effectively kind of stealing from us. Then we got facials. I never get facials, but they were supposed to be $150. They made the bill $450, and they gave a $150 tip to themselves. But the point is, like, all these things were happening and just one after another. And then the concierge demanded a tip, and then demanded the maids get a tip, and he wanted me to give him the tips for the maids. And so all these people, everywhere you were turning, were trying to take advantage of us. People are trying to get more money for providing less value than they deliver. And these are very simple incidents, talking about a hotel pool and a concierge and someone ordering champagne and stuff. These are in house guys staying in the house are very simple, but this sort of outlook and way that people approach things is something that keeps them back. It's people that do this all the time. They don't get an advantage. What happens is people don't want to do business with them in the future. Mexico, of course, is a third world country. After that experience, I would rather not go there. I just don't want to play those games and have people doing those sort of things. And the same thing goes with the guy that worked for me. And so if you think about issues you may be having in your career, and where you've been successful and where you haven't been successful, the odds are that where you haven't been successful, there's something like that sometimes that's happening in the background where you're not really providing as much value or you're cutting corners or something. And when you're cutting corners, that is an example of taking more than you're giving. So I have a relative, this is another religious story, but this is a weird LA-based religion, and it's not weird, I guess, but the religion requires him to work in their center, give him all his money. So the relatives feel like he's being exploited. He's expected to work for free for long hours and give them also all the money he makes in his regular job. And he's literally living at like a near poverty level to support the organization. And the religion just keeps bullying him to give him all this money. So this is an example of someone that actually is being taken advantage of. And sometimes that happens. There are cases where people are exploited and taken advantage of. There are firms that will exploit you and never advance you and expect you to work for less than you're worth. Or any group that takes more than it gives typically has problems. And this particular religion, is, you would know it, is the subject of all sorts of negative documentaries and stuff because it's taking more than it gives. And people that take more than they give end up failing. Organizations that take more than they give end up failing. And even countries that take more than they give end up failing. If you think about your life, you should ask yourself, do you feel maybe that you're being used and taken advantage of by anybody? Do you feel like you may be being exploited by others? Or are you trying to exploit other people in groups you belong to and get the most out of them? It's just, you have to think about what's going on. And if in every business, by the way, if you run a business or even running a family, everybody is going to want a lot of stuff out of you. They're going to want, if you run a business, your employees are going to want more, your company is going to want more. Everybody is going to want more, and people will want to work less. And that's just how it is. And so there's always, what a company does, or what any law firm or business does, is they're looking for people that are providing more and getting rid of people that are providing less. And they're trying to mediate that process. And the people that always are kept around are the people that are providing far more value than they're taking. When there's layoffs in the firm, by the way, when firms lay people off, and it happens all the time, that's the calculation they're making. This person giving more than they're taking. And the people that are giving the most are always the ones that are kept around. And that's one reason why what I'm talking about today may not seem like the most important thing in the world, but it actually is extremely important, because this is the calculation that's going around. People are asking themselves, are you providing more than others? So my company, like what I'm always doing at this company, is we're always, trying to get people to improve. We're trying to get people to understand, for example, in the legal placement business, to identify better fits for the candidates, to spend more time understanding an individual candidate to make them look better to a law firm by humanizing them, to find more positions in the market, to work harder with firms need a certain type of person to identify them. So there's all sorts of things, and people fight those efforts. People they try to resist. And the interesting thing is that as a company evolves, like, people will always kind of fall off because people get comfortable providing a certain level of effort for a certain level of reward. It doesn't always work. And it's because a lot of times you fight that. You fight the effort to improve, or you fight that you're always going to run into problems. The typical attitude is that a lot of people grow up with and learn is that you go to work for someone, you get paid for your effort and time. And a lot of times people will believe that, certain academic accomplishments, living in a certain area and so forth, give them the right to a specific salary. And it's almost some people will approach things as like an us against them attitude inside of law firms, and they'll believe that they're in charge, or they have a certain, there's a kind of an antagonism between the organization and themselves. And so they need to get as much as they can. And that's really happens in all graduates, in all organizations. But once I hired a member, not several years ago, an Ivy League law school graduate to choose stories and then to edit them for an online publication he was running. I paid him actually as much as I would for that job that he would have made practicing law. I expected him to work hard, and instead he came into work at 10 each day, and then He'd take a lunch for an hour or so, and then most days he'd be gone by 5. And he wasn't really trying to provide that much value. And he believed that his qualifications gave him the right to do that. And he made him special, even though that was what he was doing. He was pressuring for stock options and so forth. And what he ended up doing was, because he didn't want to provide a lot of value for what he was being paid and what the company was doing, he just created a lot of pressure for himself. And I put pressure on him, managers put pressure on him, and he just and didn't have a good experience because he wasn't providing value. And so everyone around you is always trying to get you to improve. And if you don't, and you're not providing more value than you're paid, then things go bad. And he could have done all sorts of things to provide more value. In addition to his job, he could have done things outside to help the publication. Any success you have as an attorney and profession gets much greater when you abandon the idea of exchange and just throw yourself into the job. And that means you don't really care about what your initial compensation is. You just do this by improving and becoming much better than the people around you. And you improve yourself in every possible way you can. When I coach people, I talk to them about improving their personal lives so they're more effective. I talk to them about improving their work lives. I talk to them about how they can do more than other people. I talk to them about how to think about their jobs. Because if you provide much more value and you don't get in this employee mindset where you have to provide as little as possible, and you go into kind of a different mode, everything changes. And people that do well and work hard and think about providing more value always succeed. The ones that don't worry about being exploited, and people realize when you're putting your all and giving everything you have, and they want to reward you. If you don't worry about giving, then a lot of good things will happen to you. The same thing with relationships. You can't measure everything that happens. If you measure everything that happens, then you won't be rewarded. I know one attorney that with a $10 million book of business, and he was able to get that by going out of his way consistently to help general counsels and others. And what he would do is he would be out there networking in the legal community in addition to doing his regular job and going to events and so forth. He would hear about problems that general counsels and other people were having, and he would get in touch with them and contact them and talk to them about their problems and how to solve them and what they could do. And he would do these things for them without even charging them. He might go meet with them, and he would never bring up anything to do with what he was going to get paid or anything. He would go out of his way to help them, and he would talk to them about how to get a very quick solution, if it was possible, all sorts of things. And he would propose actually very smart things that would help them. People were amazed because other attorneys that he would meet with these general counsels that we were meeting with, were trying to blow up whatever the problems were and talk about all this work that needed to be done and do those sorts of things. And so this attorney's approach, that this is a very young attorney with this size book of business, and it's continually growing, is basically to go out and help people and not even do it looking for money. People, if you offer enough value to people, will offer you money. They'll offer to hire you. They won't. So this is what he does. He goes out and he finds people that have issues, and he tries to solve the problems. It's about giving, and it's not about taking. And this whole attitude of giving and not taking and worrying about being exploited. And when you think about this whole approach to getting business, which I think is remarkable, it's really about not worrying about people taking advantage of you, going out of your way to solve problems, about trying to help others. That's just not how most attorneys, a lot of people think. Instead of trying to soak people and make people sign agreements and so forth, he tries to offer solutions as inexpensively as possible. And when he does this, people remember it. He never asked to be hired, and people actually approach him and hire him. They talk about him to other people, and he's liked, and he's called for advice, and he's able to see things from other people's point of view. That's a very effective thing. And in business, by the way, in all types of business, and I brought this up earlier, but most conflicts come from people who want to take without giving. It's always like that. And it's probably like that in your personal life as well. If you can think of the majority of conflicts you have in your personal life with significant others or friends or family, most of them come down to the fact that one side wants to give or one side wants to take. And you want to be on the side of the person that's trying to give. Because more people that are trying to give and are measuring that, something that kind of creates the problem. It's the same thing with vendors, like I brought up earlier, and jobs and more. So when I was young and growing up in Michigan, my father used to pay me to do things like shovel the driveway and the sidewalk in front of the house after it snowed. And then in the summers, he would pay me to cut the lawn. In the fall, gather leaves and burn them by the side of the road. And each of these tasks would have an amount. So I might get $10 for shoveling. It's a big snowstorm and that sort of thing. But he always taught me to do something that other people wouldn't do. So he taught me to do a lot more than expected. So if I shoveled the driveways and sidewalk, he would encourage me to think about ways to do extra work to actually look like a better provider than other people. If I was asked to do the driveways and sidewalks, I would clean off an awnings, maybe remove the snow from the car, and some other tasks. And the idea is that you always wanted to do more than the average person would do. You wanted to show that you were giving more than you were actually paid for and leave that kind of impression in people's mind. And this extra work made you feel appreciated. And it also provided a lot of additional value. It was something that made you much more valuable to people, and a very positive thing. And what he would always say, which was funny, but he would say, you need to think of if you're a Japanese kid doing the work. And the reason he said that is because at the time I lived and grew up in the Detroit area, and there was like a lot of stuff going on in the auto industry. And what was happening is the Japanese were building much better cars than U.S. car companies and taking away market share just like crazy. The cars didn't break down all the time. They had higher resale value. They got better gas mileage. The fit and finish was much better. They were much cheaper. They didn't rattle and fall apart. They were just much better than American cars. The Japanese did everything they could to make their products much better and to provide more value than American cars. And honestly, by the time when I was growing up, if you looked at what would happen if you bought an American car, what would happen if you bought a Japanese car, it didn't really make sense to buy an American car. If you bought an American car for $10,000, in 2 years, it'd be worth $5,000. If you bought a Japanese car in 2 years, it would be worth $8,000. And it would, not only would it be worth $8,000, but it wouldn't have broken down. You wouldn't have had maintenance issues and all sorts of things. And the issue is American car companies were not improving. And were not providing as much value. They believed that they had a captive audience of people that had always bought American cars, and they didn't need to improve them as much. People became very concerned about getting as much money out of the auto companies as they could in terms of their pay and benefits, sorts of things. And the American companies have become, complacent. Unions dominated a lot. They had high labor costs. Everyone was worried about what they could get and not providing value. And as a consequence, the companies didn't provide value, and major cities like Detroit, Flint, and other cities in the Midwest and places in Ohio completely went to crap because they were not providing value compared to their competitors. And the people that were inside those organizations were doing the same thing. And what happened was the Japanese, when they started manufacturing cars after World War II, their quality of their cars was far below American cars. As a result, people weren't buying Japanese cars. It was like a joke, but eventually they became very good cars. The focus on providing more value and doing things better than your competition meant that they started providing much more value than they took. So if you want to have a good career and you want to do very well, providing more value than your peers is really the most important thing. You're not just trading your time to a law firm or business. What you're trading is your ability to do better work, perform better socially, contribute more than your peers, and bring in business and everything. And that's really what the name of the game is. You're always going to be evaluated based on how much value you provide compared to others. And that's why when people are let go, I see articles every day. I just saw one this morning that came out in the news about large law firms doing mass layoffs of partners that are not without business and not providing value. It's just, this is what everything is about. And there's a article, probably several articles out there like that today. And it's the same thing when associates are let go. It's the same thing when firms have financial problems. A lot of times they're providing less value to their clients than they receive. And so you have to think, how do you provide more value? And this is what the whole economic system is about. Your ability to advance, your ability to become successful, your ability to be happy in relationships and so forth is about providing more value. And more value, by the way, is not just sitting down and working. More value is how hard you use your mind and how much you think about the problems you're encountering and how well you do with that. That's one example of value. But value is just being better than everybody. Same thing with your clients. I want to talk about clients real briefly. I brought them up before, but I think this is actually important. Many attorneys, probably ones you've worked with, view the relationship with clients as somewhat antagonistic. They may be nice to them and flatter them, but then at the same time, they want to build a client as much money as possible and as quickly as possible. And many will moderate this, but many are motivated by taking as much money as they can from clients while doing as little work as possible or doing more work than necessary. And people that are continually manipulating situations like this tend to end up with no clients. People are smart and people know when they're being taken advantage of and when they're not receiving the value they're paying for. The same thing with law firms know when the people working for them aren't giving the value that they're paying for. And clients are always evaluating their options to make sure that they receive the best value possible for what they're paying. There's one thing I probably shouldn't talk about, but I'm going to talk about real briefly, and it's the upward mobility inside of law firms. Law firms prefer to hire people with 2 to 5 years of experience or so forth. And the reason for that is because those attorneys, at least at the associate level, are hungry and will provide a lot more value. They'll work longer hours, try harder, and try to come up with solutions and impress people. And when people get a little bit older, they tend to not do that as much. Now, is that true for everyone? No, of course not. But people tend to moderate the value they provide when they get older. They have families, they have that sort of thing. And certain people don't. My partners, in big firms, a lot of times, of course not, but a lot of people do. So this whole value thing is going on in the background. And I believe that the lawyers with the largest books of business, the ones that are really good and continue to have large books of business, really have their clients' backs, and they're not interested in cutting corners. They're interested in providing as much value as they possibly can and not prolonging matters. And they really do believe in providing a lot of value to their clients, doing a good job. And your ability to be happy in your life and really have a lot to do with your ability to provide more value, and not to be, also you have to learn not to be taken advantage of as well. But that's very important. Very few people, by the way, can navigate the tension between providing value and worrying about being exploited. Many people, because they don't like that conflict and they feel that they're going to be taken advantage of, often resign themselves and end up providing a lot less value, and that holds them back. But the point of all of this that I've talked about today is that working in a law firm, running a law firm, or being the best at anything means that you're probably going to be providing a lot more value than your peers, and much more. Law firms and everybody will always advance people that do that. If you offer more value, you're going to do better financially and also in terms of prestige. And if you do not provide more value than others, then you're not going to advance. I was just thinking just now, it's a funny story, but I had this job when I was young, like maybe 15 or 16, calling up people and selling them credit cards over the phone. It was in a telemarketing place, and it was incredible. I could call up, like, the shift would start at 5:30 and it would end at maybe 9, and I could literally get like 100 people per night and to do it very quickly. And my peers would only get maybe 1, 2, or 3 people. And I don't know what it was, but I had a real ability at it. The company decided that I was so good at this that instead of being in a giant call center, which I was with maybe 100 other kids, they actually put me on a different floor in my own office because they didn't want people to disturb me because they felt like my time was so valuable. Then the owner of the company started coming up to me, and then the bank that we were selling the credit cards from, the guy came and would listen to all my calls, and they started recording them. And then they wanted me to, and then they gave me raises. I hated the job, by the way. It was exhausting because you had to be like completely on and have the right kind of voice. But the point is even in that little job, I'm sure that at the age of 15 or 16, I could have probably made all sorts of money. And I would go home at night and I would read books about how to sell. And all these sorts of things. And it wasn't really that difficult, but at the same time, for me, it wasn't. But at the same time, if you get really good at something and you give more, and I gave 50 times more than my peers in terms of my average, number of these things I sold per night, and I could sell one literally 2 or 3 minutes. It makes a difference. I always want to provide a lot more value. If I just based on that, I probably could have had a career doing that age and dropped out of school if I wanted to. So in every organization, like the one I was in when I was doing this cold calling, where people would sell maybe 2 credit cards a night, there's people that attempt to skirt by without providing this much value. And many people in law firms, companies, and other organizations will provide less value than they receive. And there's this tension everywhere. I know one woman in a Los Angeles law firm. I know another one actually in another law firm. There's people that are making well over $1 million a year in very good law firms without providing value. And those sorts of people always lose their jobs eventually. Sometimes it takes a while. And those kind of people may be gaming the system, but it never lasts. And if you're in a position where you feel like you're gaming the system, you better catch up fast, because any organization is always going to get rid of those sorts of people eventually. It always happens. And you need to be on the opposite side. You should be someone, instead of the person making $1.5 million a year, billing 400 hours a year, it would be better if you were billing 3,000 hours a year and making $1.5 million a year, or had a huge book of business and were providing more value. And it was just a question of time until you were given a raise. Imagine at my age, when I'm 15 years old, being taken up to an executive floor and given a nice office with a bunch of college graduates or executives in a credit card company. It's crazy. If you provide a lot of value, you'll be advanced. You'll survive. You'll never lose your job. And if you give more than other people. And people that are unemployed, unsuccessful, having problems, typically are the ones that aren't providing a lot of value. They believe that if they don't try to take advantage of the situation, they'll be taken advantage of instead. And they never commit. They never provide as much value. And they never really put themselves in the situation of doing that and provide as much value. And because of that, they never succeed. And I have, as a business, every business does, and so I'm absolutely no different, but I've certainly encountered all sorts of people that have done everything they can to try to provide less value to me than they're paid for. There's employees that do that. There's some other people that do the exact opposite and provide as much value as they possibly can. And the people that have stuck around and are kept around are the people that do that. The people that remain with me consistently and give the most of themselves always put the needs of the company first and not themselves. And the people that do that have always been rewarded financially and done well. And the people that are no longer here, and it's like this in every company, have done the opposite. And I know one guy, for example, that started working in the mailroom of our company and did a good job and was hungry to do good work and received several raises. He may have started at like minimum wage, and pretty soon he was making maybe double of that. But then he reached a point where he started feeling like he should be receiving more as the company was growing around him. He started accomplishing less. Things stopped getting done. And then he started working all sorts of overtime when he didn't have overtime to do. And luckily, I had a manager that was working in the office late. We actually used to have an apartment in our office, and so she was staying in that apartment. Realized he'd been billing the company all sorts of for time where he was just sitting there in an office late at night, not doing any work. So he was trying to get something for nothing. And someone that became successful by working hard and providing more value, and then eventually lost their job by not doing a good job and not providing value. So the point is that if you're going to advance and do well, you need to do the best work and throw yourself into your job. An attorney should be doing whatever they can to work as hard as they can and provide as much value. And if you're young and getting good experience, you really shouldn't worry about your compensation. Compensation for an attorney, by the way, is something, if you graduate at 25, I mean, you do want to make a lot of money, but at the same time, the first 4 or 5 years are really a time to get experience. And the more work you get, the more you learn, the more experience you get. So the compensation really shouldn't be something that dominates your thought processes. And partners, by the way, they should be providing as much value as they can as their clients. That's the only way to grow a book of business. It's a competitive marketplace. There are so many attorneys out there. The more value you provide your clients, the better off you're going to be. And that's something you should always be trying to do. Everything's about providing value. And in the background of every interaction, most people questions about who's providing the most value. When they choose an attorney, they're choosing the attorney that provides the most value. And we do this with employers. Employers are doing it with us. And we do it with clients. And to be successful, the only thing you can do is try to provide more value than other people. And you don't want to be taken advantage of. You don't need to be. But any person out there is going to want to receive more value than they're paying for, and that's just how it works. The natural tendency is to elevate people that are providing more value. Like I was elevated when I was working in a call center, and that's just important. And there are people that will not pay us what you want. There are people that will take advantage of you. There are people that will play games with your compensation and so forth. And if that happens, then there's not really much you can do but leave. And you may be in a relationship where one partner refuses to contribute despite us needing them to and be taken advantage of. You may not get the rewards you're entitled to. But the thing is that I've noticed, and this is something that is very important, is when someone's underpaid at a law firm and they're working and they're doing really good work, just to get the attention of people outside the law firm and other attorneys, and they know that the kind of situation that person's in and that the person's doing really good work, and they will often hire them away. It happens all the time. If someone sees someone that's really good, they'll hire them away. It happens in law firms all the time. It happens in romantic relationships. If you're providing a lot more value, who knows what'll come along. But the point is, that you have to, and value in a relationship, by the way, is not just about what you provide. It's about affection and all sorts of other things and time, but that's just a point. But the point is that you may be in a situation where you're providing a lot more value, and that's okay, and especially when you're young. But the idea is that you do need to be in a situation where you're providing more value. Everything works when both sides are providing enough value, and that's really why people leave. It's why people go to new firms and so forth. It's all out of the search of value. And it's interesting. I was talking to someone yesterday or doing a podcast, and we were talking about law firms and how they compensate people. And there's certain rules, like a law firm typically, whatever you're compensated, the best run law firms are always going towards paying their partners and their associates about 30 to 35% of the revenue that person generates. And when people are doing that, paying too much or they're paying too little, then everything always balances themselves out. And so a law firm really is a management organization that consistently is trying to moderate what they're paying, their inputs and their outputs. And that's really what's going on. And what's going on in the background is how much you're contributing and getting rewarded. So I'm going to take a quick break, and when I come back, I will take as many questions as you want. Try to think of any possible questions you have. It doesn't have to relate to today's webinar, but it could also, could relate to anything to do with your career, and I'm happy to answer those questions. Thanks. Yeah. Okay. So the first one is, let's see here. What types of specific recommendations do you have for people to improve and increase their value in a firm setting, small group or corporate setting? What is working hard, for instance, and what is the metric for doing well? So increasing your value means every organization has different metrics of that. One way of increasing your value, one way of increasing your value is to try to anticipate problems and solutions to things that may not be readily apparent to the average attorneys. The average person that goes into a legal organization will basically try to solve problems by just doing what they're asked. And if you can figure out ways to do more than you're asked and to anticipate extra things, like that is one of the most important possible things you can do, is anticipate more things. And then in a law firm, when you're young, a lot of the value is how many hours you work. But then there's really two metrics in a law firm setting that are the most important. The first one is going to be how much business you bring in when you're older, and the next one is going to be how many hours you work. So both of those are important to increase your value. And working hard is obviously important when you're young, but increasing your value and those are, kind of things that I would think of. And the big point that I want to make to you is that having a lot of value inside of a legal organization is really just a question of your ability to solve problems in a better way, in a faster way, than in a more effective way a lot of times than the people that you're working with, and then to do better work. But everybody is evaluating you based on your value. And so value is a very big and difficult term to to pin down in a lot of respects, but I think you understand what it is. It's just the question is whether or not you're doing more than your competitors in wherever you work. And that means being the best at your job and improving and getting better and better. So, okay, let's see. Next question is, do you know of any book who could teach us how to behave in the workplace? I'm going to start my career and I'm worried about people who play strategies and this kind of things. I don't want to be the naive one who works harder and don't be noticed in politics, the workplace, vertical networking, and so forth. Ultimately, everything comes down to the quality of the work that you do and how hard you work. So when you start in a new position, then you're definitely going to be better off concentrating on the work. Politics can certainly make somewhat of a difference. The problem with politics, I've learned, is that people inside of law firms can be either on the in or the outs. And if you don't understand politics very well and don't play that game, you avoid being on the negative side of politics. So you often could be much better off not playing politics or just being very kind of aloof from it. And I've noticed that in a lot of cases, the attorneys that have the most longevity in law firms and corporate settings do not get involved in politics. Because anytime you get involved in politics and take sides on an issue, that means that someone is potentially in the future is going to be coming after you if they don't, or you're going to be making enemies when you take sides. So taking sides is a very dangerous thing. In our organization, there's politics going on. Someone's going to be unhappy and someone's going to get their way. So it's just, you have to be careful. Okay, yeah, I'm glad seems like there's a lot of questions. So the more questions you guys have, the better. Let me see here. So the next question is, due to the economic climate, is now a good time to transition from government practice to firm life? How are associates paid? I'm accustomed to steady paychecks. It is a good time, depending on your practice area, to transition from a government job to a firm job. The issue with working in the government right now is you may be actually in a very stable position. And if you're in a stable position, then I don't know that it's a good time. Certain practice areas are very much in demand right now because of this particular economy, and those include family law, trust in the states, and then a lot of smaller markets are busy. Litigation is actually getting very busy. Anytime there's an economic crisis, corporate tends to slow down, and that's happening to some extent. What I would recommend is if you want to investigate the market, then you can. Most associates in law firms are paid salaries, and if you're with the government, but associate jobs are much easier to get when you're only a few years out of school. And I don't know how many years out of school you are. That certainly could make a difference in being able to get one of those jobs. But if you're in right now, law firms are businesses, and because they're businesses, they tend to, fluctuate in terms of how well they do in different economic climates. So in a bad economic climate and one that may not be getting better soon, you may be better off staying with the government, unless that position is under threat too, which I know it is in some places. Okay. What suggestions would you have for someone entering law school and subsequent older employment and older age, more like 55 plus? And how does this also hold for solo law firm practices or small law firm practices who must provide excellent value to clients directly? Okay, if you're coming out of law school like over 55, which is actually very common, there's an article, I believe, on BCG Attorney Search or Law Crossing called Law Students Coming Out of Law School Later in Life or something. I've known attorneys that have come out of law school in their 50s, and I know one woman actually had a very good career until she was in her late 70s, working in a law firm as a litigator, and actually a very well-known law firm in Detroit. So you can definitely work in law firms through most of your career. There's no issue with working in a law firm when you get older. The only problem is that a lot of the larger law firms will avoid hiring older attorneys just because they want younger people, unless you have some very good experience. Sometimes people may have been worked in healthcare, some sort of area where there's not a lot of attorneys, where your experience could be very valuable. And so they may, despite being older, they may hire you. You can also start as a solo practitioner. Before you start a solo practitioner job, though, I would really recommend getting some training. Most of the training that happens for lawyers isn't in law school, just teaches you how to question assumptions and improves your reading skills and logic and some other things, and teaches you some fundamentals. But the most important things that an attorney learns really are learned on the job. So you should try to work under someone, and the better the attorney, the firm, the better for the first couple of years, because that's where most of the learning occurs. Thank you for creating these programs to help legal professionals. I watched a couple of videos and read the book Attorney Job Search Secrets Revealed. I found these materials inspiring and valuable. I graduated from law school in 2018 and have been practicing tax law at an accounting firm, but I've been making a career transition to switch my practice to litigation for a while with a goal of pursuing a federal clerkship 3 years later when my immigration status allows me to do so. Working as a judicial intern during law school was the most enjoyable time in my career life. I was wondering whether you can share some insights into addition to looking for jobs in litigation. What else can I do to increase my value as a litigator, and what types of firms would you recommend? If you've been practicing tax law, it is difficult to sometimes to transition into a law firm immediately. What I would recommend is if you do want to be a federal clerk, I don't know if it says something here about your immigration status, so you need to have okay. I'm sure there's plenty of, I don't know if there's other government jobs you can work with while you're getting immigration experience, but if you really do want to be, or you're getting your immigration papers, but if you really want to be a litigator, the best thing to do is probably to apply to smaller firms to start. And you can also apply to large law firms if you're at a tax firm. The other option is most tax firms do have some litigation related work in them, and you certainly could do that as well. I don't know why you went into doing tax law. If people that do tax law tend to think in a certain way, and it's a different thinking style, a lot of cases, than litigation. But if you like litigation, then it is something you should try. But what I would recommend would be perhaps probably trying to work in a smaller law firm. Another option might be that I could recommend would be you could, and one actually very good strategy in my opinion, if you really want to transition to a federal clerkship and get into litigation. If you do a federal clerkship, the odds are very good that you can get hired as a litigation attorney after doing that. So what I would try to do probably is if you don't want to give up the job security, working in an accounting firm right now, to try working in a smaller law firm, and also the pay is probably going to be much better than a lot of the jobs you could get. Then another thing that you could do is you could start applying for maybe state court clerkships and other types of clerkships, or state court public defender or state court prosecutor jobs. That would throw you in and give you litigation experience right away. Once you got that experience, then you could start applying once you got your immigration status resolved to federal judges to clerk for them. And then after a federal clerkship, you probably wouldn't have any problem getting a litigation job. And that would be a way that I would do it that would give you a lot more security. I wasn't aware that you had to be an American citizen to clerk for a federal judge, but I don't know if that's just with federal judges or federal district judges, but that's how I would approach that. Okay, let's see. Let's see here. I've read your blog post for a number of years and never found anyone else writing so truthfully about working at a U.S. law firm. I love reading your post. I have found myself in a unique position due to COVID-19 and need someone with your level of experience to help me through. My situation is this. I've lost my job as a junior mid-level associate in an elite firm after only 8 months in the middle of the pandemic. The head of the practice terminated on the basis of performance issues to attract any negative attention to her practice. They behaved appallingly. HR and all partners involved in the process to justify termination. How should I go about telling my next in line I'm no longer employed at a elite firm? I was given 2 months notice by my elite firm and did all my interviews with another firm over Zoom, but they have not made me an offer yet. As they said, they would like to make me in person. They would like to meet me in person before extending one. I was talking to this other firm while I'm looking for new job opportunities. Oh wait, I was talking to this other firm. Okay, I think cut off, but I can definitely answer most of that. And if you want to follow up, that's actually a good question, because I think a lot of people are in your position right now. So to answer the first thing in terms of what happened with your firm, that's one thing that's very scary about working in law firms. The law firms are trying to protect their outside reputation. A lot of times they will lay people off or let them go, and they'll try to base it on performance reasons. One thing I just want to be very clear to you about, and you should understand, is, in my opinion, unless you've done something appalling, and I've seen people do some great funny stuff, that's appalling. But unless you've done something appalling, and preferably not related to legal work, I mean, something where you shouted some obscenities in the hall or something, at no one, just something crazy. Unless you've done something crazy, there's really no excuse for letting someone go with only 8 months of experience, because an associate in a young firm, someone that's young, doesn't really know what they're doing. And it takes a couple of years to develop the writing skills, if you're a litigator, to develop the understanding of corporate documents and the level of detail necessary and all sorts of things. So anybody that's let go, by the way, even with, I would say, almost less than 2 years of experience, I mean, should not, unless probably it can be a learning lesson and you can think back on all the things you did wrong and improve. But honestly, I don't think it's appropriate that law firms should let someone go with 8 months of experience for performance related. I think the odds are better than 50-50 that it really wasn't performance related. Now, there may have been people doing a better job than you, which is the whole idea of providing more value. And that's why this topic that I talked about today is so important. But one thing I would say in terms of your termination after 8 months is every law firm, because of the timing, anybody that looks at your resume and sees it is going to believe that it was related to the economy. And so I'm not going to tell you to lie about why you were let go, because that certainly wouldn't be appropriate. But if the firm was letting people go because of this virus, or their work was slowing down, or your partner's work was slowing down, then that's certainly something you could say. So if you were working for one partner and her work really was slowing down, instead of talking about all this negative stuff, you could tell the firm that my partner I was working for was losing work and her work was slowing down. You could do it that way. There's also, you may want to challenge the firm and that you didn't do anything wrong. But the point is that I would say that's most important for you to understand is that I would do whatever I can to not feel bad about this. The most important thing you can do when you get laid off or let go from a firm is to be very aggressive and to apply to as many places as you can. I don't know, if you were working at a really good firm, you were probably let go. You're probably in a fairly large market. I would also the firms in smaller markets. The faster you're employed, the better. So you should be applying to lots and lots of places. Someone with 8 months of experience probably should not be using a recruiter unless you're in some very rare practice area, but you probably should be doing most of this on your own, because for the most part, law firms hire people with experience. You're welcome to contact us, but we probably wouldn't be you're probably better off doing most of the stuff on your own. Then during the 2 months notice while you're using your voicemail and so forth, it's always better to try to negotiate that and get a longer period of time because it's much easier to get a job while you're employed. So I would recommend doing that. And then the other thing I would recommend doing is I would recommend that you do everything you can to apply to as many places and as many markets as you possibly can. Some good markets for elite attorneys during pandemics are markets outside of major cities are good. Another market that's always good would be markets like Washington, D.C. tends to do well in every different type of economic climate. And if a firm does want to meet you, I definitely would meet them. And then when you meet them, you need to be confident and you need to go in and not act like something negative happened, really sell yourself and be enthusiastic and connect with the people there. And the most important thing, by the way, with interviews is just connection. So everybody wants connection and everybody wants to feel like they're connect with people. So a lot of attorneys, young attorneys, especially like yourself, make the mistake that people interviewing them just want the skills or the work, but it's also about connection. So if you have any follow-ups, I'm happy to answer that. It's a good question. I know a lot of people in your situation. Okay, I am looking for new opportunities. Let me just see here. As a paralegal professional staff in Boston, I work as an assistant to the Belgian ambassador. Prior to that, I used to work as an attorney in Brussels. Would someone with my background experience be interesting for a paralegal position in Boston? Yes, you would actually be great for a paralegal position, especially for an attorney applying to be a paralegal position. And I'm assuming good English skills. Yeah, you shouldn't have really too much problem finding a job. The key is to apply to lots of places and just to look very available. So I don't think you'll have really any issues, but you need to apply to a lot of places because anytime you're applying to places, you have to remember you're competing with U.S. attorneys. And people think you may have language issues or whatever, then they may be less likely to hire you. So okay, here's a long question, which I'm excited about. Let's see. I have practiced, and just keep asking as many questions as you guys want. I'm answering all these live. I have all the time in the world for this today. Pretty much. So I've practiced all manners of appeals. And so anything you guys can think of that would be helpful, I'll try to provide you as much information as I can. I've provided or practiced all manner of appeals, civil, criminal, administrative, for nearly 14 years. My wife, who is an Australian citizen, was offered a university teaching position in Melbourne, Australia. We were hoping to move there. We were hoping to move there at the end of the year, but with COVID-19, our plans may be delayed. What is the overseas market for American lawyers in Australia? I contacted the Victorian Admissions Board, which is equivalent to their bar, and was told that in order to practice in Melbourne, I have to take 4 classes plus another 6 months of practical legal training. Is it worth it to go back to law school in another country? Do American firms sponsor American lawyers to get work visas overseas? What are your thoughts about working and living abroad? Okay, that's a great question. And I know a lot of people on this call may be interested in working abroad, and that's something American attorneys can do all the time. The problem with being a litigator is those skills aren't always transferable to other countries. Fortunately, Australia is a common law country, so you theoretically could transfer and work there, but the system is just completely different. The habits you have picked up are completely different. Also in Australia, the pay is much lower, even in the major firms, which I'm sure you're aware of, and there's not a good market for American lawyers in Australia. You could certainly take the bar and the classes and the training and get admitted and perhaps find a job. I do think it would be worth it trying to get a job over there. Most of the American firms that would hire you would only do so if you had what is called capital markets, which is a brand. It's basically U.S. securities law. It would be very popular. Australian attorneys all the time try to go to the U.S. because of the pay, and so it's very difficult to. It's definitely something where the opposite of American attorneys going to Australia occurs far more often than the converse. But if it was me, yeah, if I was really moving there, I probably would think about going to law school there and doing it. I think it'd be fun. I think you're going to have a little bit of an uphill battle, though. The same rules that are in the United States, which are attorneys are most marketable as associates with 1 to 4 to 5, 6 years, and then as partners when they have business, kind of work there. As a 14-year appellate attorney in the United States, it would be difficult for you, even with being a graduate of the top 5 law school, and to get another position because there's just not a lot of appellate jobs. And I don't know what the market for appellate jobs is in Australia, but certainly it would be probably even harder than here. So that's a good question. And the other thing for people that are interested in working and living abroad is I work with a lot of U.S. attorneys that have become partners at big firms overseas. It's difficult to really go far sometimes in a local office if you're an American attorney, because they tend to prefer to people that are going to stay there. When law firms are hiring people, they're always asking 4 questions, 3 questions. Can they do the job? Can they be managed? Will they do the job long term? And a lot of times the 3rd question, which is, will you do the job long term, is something that can hurt you because they're always worried that you could leave. Okay, here's a good question. How does one provide more value without taking on more commitments than one can handle? That's a great question. So when I was in law firms, people would always call and ask if I could do a certain assignment. And if you say no, when you're overwhelmed, then there's always a negative connotation. Okay, maybe I'll ask you to do something in the future. So the attorneys are always trying to get hours, but at the same time, if you turn down work, then that's a bad thing. So something that I've noticed is, and I hate to say this, is a lot of times the attorneys that go the farthest are the ones that don't turn down work or figure out how to get it done. At the same time, the attorneys that have the most problems, that quit, that lose it, that have problems, a lot of times take on more work than they can handle. So that's a great question, but it's very dangerous taking on more work than you can handle. And there's nothing wrong with saying no. If you do very good work with the people that you're working for, you make sure you do things perfectly, then that's good. The problem with taking on more work than you can handle is that when you do that, the quality of your work for the new person that's asked to do the assignment can suffer, because you may get to it late, you may not do it thoroughly, and the problem in your other work with other people can suffer. You need to be very careful about that. Okay, let's see. Here's the next one. I'm a Duke Law alumnus, multilingual attorney. I work as an in-house counsel for a Los Angeles-based company, an affiliate of a publicly traded hospitality real estate company, where my practice focuses on private M&A transactions. I'm interested in making a switch back to private practice, specifically corporate finance group. What would be the best way to go about this? Okay, that's great. Obviously, being a Duke law graduate is a great thing, and working in the hospitality public real estate market that you're working in is good. I'm not sure if you do hospitality private M&A transactions or not, but you have what looks like a great group, a great experience. Now, if you're in real estate, what I would recommend is there are several real estate firms that do nothing that concentrate in real estate in Los Angeles. One of them would be Cox Castle, which I'm sure you're familiar with. You've got Percher, would be another good one. Then you've got, of course, Allen Mathins, which also has a corporate-related practice. So a lot of times, I've had a lot of success with people from hospitality-related companies that have specific experience doing that sort of thing. You may actually, they're doing it, it's a real estate-related company, a real estate related firm. And there's a lot more than the ones I just mentioned that you could apply to. You can apply to them in a lot of different ways. You could research it. You could use a legal placement or a recruiter. You could look for job openings. In order to do M&A, the issue is that if you go to work at a firm that doesn't have kind of that real estate niche, then you're going to be competing with other attorneys that have a lot of experience. I don't know how much experience you have, but the problem is once you make a move to go in-house, a lot of times the law firms will believe that you don't want to work in a law firm and that you may go back in-house again. A lot of times people go in-house for the wrong reasons, which are to escape the grind of the law firm. I would do it with a real estate focus if you could. If not, the other thing I would recommend, it's important for all corporate attorneys to have transaction seats, and also for litigators, which is a different discussion, but I would think about what your transaction sheet looks. If you want to do M&A, which you're doing, then you would have a transaction sheet that would have that list at the top. If you want to do corporate finance, it doesn't say a lot about your corporate finance, but it's going to be very difficult for you to transition to corporate finance at your level if you're in-house and senior and you don't have that experience. If you have the experience at a law firm, then you can. I would apply to law firms, but if you're working for a public company, most of the law firms are going to be interested in you would be large law firms because the type of work you have is going to be fairly experienced. So that's what I would recommend. I would also recommend applying to positions as they come up, and then having a very good story about why you want to go to work in a law firm as opposed to staying in-house. And typically that is doing more sophisticated work. You're doing the same kind of transactions over and over again and so forth. So that's how I would deal with that. Okay, so here's a good question too. I have 18 years of experience, and yeah, just keep asking questions. I hope this helps you guys. I'm trying to give you all the advice I know. Let's see here. I have 18 years of experience in commercial real estate lending, which mostly involved transactional law. After getting burned out on commercial real estate lending, I went to law school and got my JD in December of 2018. I passed the Nevada bar in October of last year. I'm having a really hard time getting any opportunity in transaction law. What can I do to help my odds of finding a position? Okay, yeah, I don't know what kind of real estate transactional law experience you got specifically in Nevada, but the market's actually very good in Nevada for real estate. It always is. And so I think you have a couple of different things. I'm assuming you're probably in Las Vegas, if not Reno. There's lots of real estate firms that do real estate in Nevada. And honestly, what I would do is I would apply to all of them. And I know that sounds insane, but I would apply to all the firms that do real estate work that are law firms. The other thing you can do that would actually be very smart would be apply to all the real estate development companies and research those. You do not need a recruiter to do this. You don't even need a job site. But if you have a lot of experience in this, you should be applying to every possible place you can. And you need a story about why you went to law school. It shouldn't be that I got burned out during commercial real estate lending. It should be something along the lines of I really loved commercial real estate and I wanted to do that. You can certainly get an opportunity in any type of transactional law. The reason I'm saying you should be doing real estate is because that's what your background is. Anytime you do something for a long period of time, you understand the players. And so you're going to understand what a real estate attorney, what real estate people are like. You're going to understand developers. You're going to understand the lingo. You're going to be able to get along with different types of people. And that will help you. Just going and doing corporate or something unrelated to that is not a good idea. So you need to have a pitch that you want to go into real estate related work. There's so many places in Las Vegas to do it. And there's even that would be interested in hiring you. And the other thing is if that doesn't work out, you can always apply to places, Reno, and then Even Summerlin, there's firms. I would just apply all over and just research them. Sending them an unsolicited resume with a cover letter explaining your interest is very smart. And then once you sit down with these places, especially if they do real estate, you're going to know all the players and you have a lot in common with them and be able to talk to them. And that's going to help you get in the door. And it's also going to help you start conversations with people when you get into the firms. It will make you much more employable than if you were just doing straight, trying to just apply to transactional positions. You need to figure out what it is in your background that makes you special. And if it's real estate, that's what's going to get you in the door. Okay, hope that helps. After returning to work after a 2.5-year hiatus due to a medical disability, I'm not having any luck so far. Is there anything I can help aid my job search to reach a resume? Or what should I be adding to a cover letter? Any help would be appreciated. Yeah, so I talk to people all the time. We just had a meeting this morning about someone that had a big medical disability, and we're figuring out how to market them. There's nothing wrong, by the way, with even mentioning that sometimes in a cover letter. Other things you can do too. If you're a woman, a lot of times it's very acceptable to take time off with your kids, even for fathers who have kids, to take time off to spend time with your kids and so forth. And that's really the main thing that if you have another reason for something else you may have done. Now, if you're completely incapacitated, then you can say that as well. You can just say, but trying to deflect things and make it a little bit more palatable for firms and make yourself human sometimes is good. So there's nothing wrong with talking about having had some sort of medical disability. Now, what I would recommend there, if you go to the or.com site, there's all sorts of videos on there about different ways of applying to jobs. The ways you can do that are, obviously, you can find places through networking. You can build lists of firms and places to apply. Anytime you're applying to the same firms that people that are looking for jobs are applying to, you have to remember, that you're competing with people that are trying to do sometimes the same things as you are. People are always, let me actually see if I can open some notes here for you, because I just want to, give me 1 second. Oops, I don't want to do that. I'll do this real quickly. Open a new thing here, because this is actually a good question. Anytime you're applying for someone that's looking for, that you're competing, for the same job, where you're applying for jobs on job boards and so forth, what happens, you're competing with everyone else. So you're competing with everyone else. And so employers are self-centered. I don't mean that in a negative way, but employers want to hire the best people. And they're always asking to hire and interview the best people. So anything that's going to detract you from looking like the best person would be something along the lines of time off or whatever. And so you're competing with people that are employed. So if you're competing with people that are employed, they're going to obviously look like better applicants. So that's the problem. So how do you get the way people are employed? Sorry. So the way to get around that, if you want to get around that, the way to do that is to look like to be the only applicant, or to put yourself in a position where you look very unique. So how do you look unique? The only way to look unique is to be the only applicant, which means you apply to places that don't have openings. The only other way, in addition to being unique, is to make your experience look exceptional for whatever the position is. Look very focused and exceptional. If you were like a patent attorney, for example, and I don't know what type of attorney you are, but to be one of the only few people in the country that can do a certain type of hat. I heard a story once that was actually interesting. There was a guy in my high school that the year before me that wasn't that great of a student, but got into Harvard College. And the way he got in was he had a profound interest in bugs. He studied bugs and wrote papers about bugs. That's very unique. So anytime there's a lot of competition for something, being unique makes a big difference. So that's one way. So you could be the only applicant, applying to places without openings. You could network to get a job, or you could apply to other markets where there's not a lot of people like you, without other people like you. So those are some of the things that I would do. And then you just need to think, anytime just for anybody that's on this call, one thing I would say is anytime that you're looking for a job, the most important thing you can do is you need to position yourself in a way that you look like the absolute best applicant for whatever the job is. And so that means having a good story. And if you were sick, you could have maybe a heroic story about overcoming something. You don't want to get into too much detail, but at the same time, you can make that work for your advantage. So that's how I would do that. There's a lot of articles and things I've written. I would look at them. There's an article called Taking a Hiatus from the Practice of Law on BCG, I think, that I wrote a while ago, and I would look at that. Okay, let's go to the next one. I hope that helps, and if you have any follow-up questions, let me know. Again, I'm going to answer all these questions that you guys have. Okay, this next question is, I'm currently a practicing chemical engineer about 4 years out of law school. I became very interested in the work that a patent practitioner, agent, attorney does, and most of my research has shown that electrical engineering and computer science is the hot area right now. As it so happens, I had the opportunity to pursue additional education with my current employer, and because I enjoy all things engineering, I was planning on pursuing another degree, either an EE or a CS. Now, that being said, I have a few questions that you may be able to answer, which are centered in the patent field. Does it matter if I go for an EE or CS, or are they in the same level of demand? That's the first question. In terms of patent attorneys, the most demanding practice, the one that's in the most, are patent agents or attorneys. If anyone doesn't know what a patent agent or attorney is, essentially what a patent agent is, they can practice before the patent bar. Attorneys that are mid the patent bar can as well, but there's just some law firms have a lot of patent agents, others have only patent attorneys, some have a mix. But they really can do the same work. The most marketable is always double E's. It just teaches you to think in a certain way, but that's if you want to be a patent prosecutor. I hate to get into this, and this has nothing to do with anything that I do for a living. But you can also make a lot of money if you major in computer science doing as a programmer, so you have a fallback to do that. So that's just something to think of. But I would recommend, if you want to be a patent prosecutor or a patent agent, the EE is definitely the most marketable. It's more marketable than a computer science degree. Things involving EEs, which are transistors and computer chips and so forth, are much more patentable than software, which is your CS. If I go for another degree, it could either a BS or an MS. Does having one the other matter? Keep in mind that my current BS is in chemical engineering. I don't know. I think a master's degree obviously is going to be better than a bachelor's degree on chemical engineering, but I don't know which one requires more classes. Sometimes a master's degree is a one-year program in electrical engineering. Others, it's more. It just depends, I guess, on the school. But I would think a master's would be better. Third, would having engineering degrees in two different disciplines, chemical engineering and EE, make me more marketable? Are employers typically not as interested? So that's a good question. So your question is, would you have a EE and a CS, or EE or CS and chemical engineering? So no. So the largest law firms are specialists. And so what that means is the largest law firms will typically do one or the other. The patent attorneys they'll prosecute one. They'll have people that are specialists, and they justify charging higher rates and so forth based on having attorneys that are specialists in one practice area or another. So if someone does one type of patent work, then they can charge a higher rate. If they do multiple things, then they can't always do that. So you're actually much better off, especially having dual degrees in one thing. Having the chemical background is good. And what I like about the chemical background is there's also opportunities there. And if you have chemical and double E, that gives you the ability to do life sciences and hard sciences patent prosecution, which is actually pretty cool. But that's actually probably more likely to work at a smaller firm than in a larger law firm. So I hope that helps. Okay, let's see. Oh, here's a good question. This is fun. I am a commercial litigation partner in a large LA firm. I graduated from SC in 2003, and I have a $1 million book of business. I've worked at two, I'm not going to say the name of the firm because I don't want to give you away. I've worked at two very prestigious firms. For years, I've been considering going in-house. I am tired of billing hours, and I want to work on something that has value independent of my time. I would like to get equity in a company and help out on the business side of things. I'm also interested in leaving California for Utah, Idaho, Texas, or Colorado, although I would stay in California for the right opportunity. I see myself as the in-house head of litigation for a large company or as a GC for a smaller company. Can you advise me on how to achieve this goal? Sure. The first thing I would say to you, I think you've been out long enough to know whether or not you like working in a law firm or not. I would think if you did want to go to, if your business was transferable to another firm, you might be able to find a situation where you could do less of the work yourself and have other people do it for you, which is just one thing I would say, which is like running a business. But if I'm going to answer a question because you want to work in-house and you don't like having to bill your time, and I completely understand that. And that's something that I see a lot of people doing. You want to know about how to achieve that goal. As I'm sure you're aware, the biggest problem with going in-house as a litigator is there's not as many of those opportunities out there. That's one thing. The other thing about being a litigator is that you don't necessarily have a corporate background. And so a lot of the work that is done in corporations, they tend to hire corporate attorneys because of those reasons. So I've seen a lot of people do that. As a matter of fact, my mentor went in-house at a firm in Utah that does videos or something, takes negative stuff out of videos. And all these markets are good potential markets in Utah, Idaho, Texas. So there's a couple of different ways to do that. I would recommend the first thing is signing up for alerts with things like Law Crossing to get listed in-house jobs in those markets. I would also recommend looking into, I don't know what type of litigation you do. Like one of the kind of placements that I've made a lot of are people like IP litigators. There's all sorts of companies that have needs for IP litigators to defend them and they don't want to pay law firms. The other thing I would recommend is I personally would go, if I was in your situation, what I would do, this is just how I would go about it. And I'm a specialist in making law firm placements and not in-house placements, but I understand the in-house market. I would go and I would research the largest in-house legal departments are in those markets. And some of them are going to be fairly large. And once I've researched those in-house markets, I would probably message the GCs of those companies or that have large litigation departments. I would probably contact them through LinkedIn, or I might even call them on the phone. I've hired lots of people, by the way, in legal positions and others that have just left me a message and they've said, hello, my name's such and such. I'm from this law firm, or I'm from this, and this is a personal call. It's not a business call. I'd like to talk to you. And if you leave a message like that on their machines for GCs and so forth, and you say who you are and where you're calling from, they will call you back. If you say it's personal, don't say it's business, because otherwise they'll think you're trying to get business from them. When they call you back, you can talk to them about your interest in their company. If you have connections in Utah or Idaho, about your interest doing. That's one option to do, and that actually works, and it's a very effective strategy. No one's going to tell you that, but you're going to be much better off doing that. You're going to be better off probably than using a recruiter to try to get jobs that way, but you need to do a lot of this legwork and research on your own to find the companies that have decent sized litigation departments. And that means at least a couple of people. I don't think GC is necessarily going to be something that you could find right away. And one caution I would give you is that in a law firm, your value is based on your ability to generate business and do work. And inside of a company, it's also fairly political a lot of times. So that's just something. But I think in a litigation role, I think is a good idea. So that's one aspect of how I would approach that. I certainly would apply to jobs as there were openings, but I would do it that way. And of course, the most obvious thing that I haven't brought up that I would think about doing would be potentially talking to your clients. And that when you meet with clients and talk to them about that, you can save them money. They may be interested in working with you that way, going in-house with clients. That would be one way I would do it. Interesting story, and I'll just bring this up. I know one guy that was at a large law firm in LA. I think he was at, he was at IRL or something. I don't remember what firm it was, or maybe it was, I don't know. But he was at a large law firm in LA, and he had a book of business, and he decided that he didn't want to work in a law firm anymore. And so what he did was he approached all of his clients, and he would approach one that had spent maybe $100,000 a year for the past 10 years with a firm, or as one of his clients, and approach another that had spent $50,000 and another that had approached a couple $100,000. He would say, why don't you hire me on retainer, and I will agree to work on all your matters for 60% or whatever, or half the amount that you were paying me in the past. And so then he walked away for a year, and then we'll talk it the next year. And so he walked away with $1 million a year in retainers and started working on all his clients that way. Now, he had a larger book of business, but maybe you have a $2 million book of business, but that actually worked for him. Then he eventually transferred into doing which is funny, but he transferred into doing wealth management where he would work for these companies, US Trust or something, and those kind of things eventually. But that's just one option I would do. And then in terms of companies, the clients of your companies, bringing in smaller companies is the way I would do it. I hope that helps because I know this is a very important question for you. And if you have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer it. But that's how I would approach it. Okay, let's see here. Answer live. Hi, I recently read your article on LLM programs and their futility. From my general search, it seems like you are right. The tax LLM seems to be the only one that has value. I'm curious about your thoughts on Duke LLM's program in entrepreneurship. The program looks very different to me compared to LLMs in other area. Your thoughts? Okay, that's a great question. I don't know anything about Duke's LLM and entrepreneurship. Certainly, anytime you're sitting behind a desk and learning about things, it can be useful. In my experience, a lot of people are just kind of natural entrepreneurs and some people aren't. And I don't know why you would need an LLM in that, but it could be useful. And it may be fun stuff to learn about. I don't know what's in it. I don't know that it would help you with your career, but if you want to be an entrepreneur and so forth, and when you think that there's useful information and things you would like to learn about, it certainly could give you a leg up, in that. And certainly having Duke on your resume is a good thing. There's a cost to it, and I don't know. I've never seen some LLM on entrepreneurship getting with that kind of qualification working in a large law firm, but I'm just not sure. But I think it sounds interesting. I certainly would love to do that if I had the time. It sounds like a fun program, but I just don't know anything about it. If you're not doing it to advance your career and you're doing it because you're interested in it, I think any depth you get to your background can be helpful. So if that helps. Okay, and if you have any other questions about LLMs, I'm happy to answer those too. Okay, I expect my circumstances are unique, but as someone who's placed thousands, perhaps not. I began my career at Sullivan Cromwell. I've not placed thousands of attorneys at Sullivan Cromwell. Became MD in general, or deputy GC at a big company, and general counsel at another big company. I'm not putting these names down because I want to preserve their confidentiality. And one of them was a financial services, another was a mobile advertising. About a year ago, I started my own digital advertising firm. Oh, that's interesting. I focused on the real estate vertical where I'm a part owner, chief operating officer, and general counsel. Recently, I read your article, Never Try to Be Someone Different Than Who You Are. It resonated with me. I've taken a risk at various points in my career and because I felt I needed to in order to grow, when in fact, deep down, I knew all along what I was really good at, deal work. I've come to realize my interest and skill set is very focused on deal work, structuring, negotiating, executing, closing. I'm considering my future term options and would like to not only that it be valuable to a law firm, but given the opportunity to a very good book of business. I'm a hustler. Okay, that's a great question. And people like me, or so my grandmother tells me, I have no doubt it'll be a tremendous value add. How can I convey my value to a law firm to work for? Okay, the first thing, so if you started your career at Sullivan & Cromwell, that's just an awesome firm. And for people on this call that don't know what it is, it is one of probably the top 5 hardest firms to get a job at in the country, at least large law firms. It's a great place. And you obviously have a lot of talent and interest in the law. And the fact that you like deal work so much means that Sullivan & Cromwell, by the way, great firm. They pick really good people. To work there. It's a great, and then the culture is good. There's just a lot of very good things about the firm, and I'm a real fan of it. It's not a place I make a lot of placements at because they really do not hire laterally very much, but I can't say enough good things about that firm. So if you learn there and you got your early training there, you're obviously a very good attorney. You've had good jobs. The problem is you did read the article trying not to be something you're not. A lot of attorneys believe, and I've seen this all the time. I've seen one very successful attorney I know in Los Angeles. He had a very successful law firm, and then he decided that he needed to be an entrepreneur and started opening ice cream stores. And then his law firm failed, and it was a well-known firm in LA. It's just, so you do need to do what you're good at. And if you do deal work, then that's what you should be doing, and that's where you provide the most value. So anytime you find something where you provide a lot of value, you should do whatever you possibly can to gravitate towards that. And if clients like you when you do it, and if firms have liked you in the past when you do it, then you should continue doing that. I don't think there's anything wrong with telling a law firm that's what you miss and that's where your skill set is. But one other thing I just want to bring up to you that's important and is worth thinking about is a lot of people dabble in stuff. When you were at Sullivan & Cromwell, what Sullivan & Cromwell would have done to you is they would have made you extremely focused on being good at doing deal work. They would have made you be very good at that, and they would have pounded that into you, and you would have literally learned at the highest level of how to do deal work and become very good at it. And the problem is now you're working in some of these newer, different practice settings and running your own company. That's just requires a different skill set. So naturally, you're gravitating towards something you may have been good at in the past. And in general, the more you put into something, the better you get at it. So you actually may have skills as an entrepreneur, you may have skills doing all this different types of stuff, but being a COO is being a people person, organizing people, a general counsel is different. And it's just, and then a business owner is a different skill than that. These are like three different skills. And so it may be hard to do that, but you actually may be good at this and not believe it just because you're coming up against resistance. A lot of people will start something and then they'll like it at first and they'll learn and they'll come up against resistance and then they'll drop back. And it's a very common thing. So if it was me, I would think about that. But at the same time, if you really do miss law firms, then I would tell them that. And with your law firm experience, you just need to convey to them that, that you are capable of doing business, you would be committed if you went to a law firm and you would do well. And this thing I just wanted to show you, I always come back to this, but the three things law firms ask when they're interviewing you, and this is just, they ask, can you do the job? Which you can. The answer is yes, you definitely can. Can you be managed? Probably, because you worked at S&C. Yes, probably. And the reason for that is because you worked at S&C and so forth. And then the next question they ask is, will you do the job long term? And the reason is they don't want to hire people that are just going to dabble in something. Maybe not. They don't want to hire people that are just going to dabble in something. And dabbling means that you will try it and then decide that, no, maybe you want to go back to doing this. You maybe want to go back to doing this. And these are the questions that I when I meet people, I can instinctively a lot of times, but that's just something that that they're going to be asking. So the only way to get around this idea of you may not do the job long term sometimes is to take a risk. And so one of the risks that I've seen people do when they're trying to do this is they may try to apply to jobs in areas that normally couldn't get an attorney of their caliber. So that means you might try to apply to firms in places like Ohio, Wisconsin, Boise, places that normally don't see people that have been trained at solving a problem because they're willing to take a chance. But law firms in cities like New York City and Chicago and LA, they're less willing to take that chance because if they don't think you're going to do the job long term and commit, then there's too much of a risk for them. But hiring, your skills will outweigh any risk the other way. If you have any follow-up questions, it's a great question. I'm happy to answer that. Thanks for that question. Let's see here. Okay, Mr. Barnes. I'm a 1L at a tier 2 law school near a major market. I've read a lot of great deal of your blog material and have come to a fork in the road in terms of my career goals. I want to become a litigator, but it seems that the prestige of my school and the market forces are working against me in this regard. I feel that transactional work will give my career greater flexibility in terms of building a book of business and moving up and into more prestigious firms. But I really do love legal research and writing much more in general. Should I choose a career in transactional law if I think I can be a solid litigator? My goal has always been to get into the most well-known and respected firms, but I fear that not having gone to a top law school may hinder that goal of mine, forcing me to do transactional work. Any advice? Okay, so that's actually, most attorneys are litigators. So litigation jobs are actually the easiest to get. There's lots of litigation jobs all over. There's tons of them. They're litigators on every street in the country practically. They're just all over. And I don't think you're going to have a hard time getting a litigation job. Now, you do bring up a good point. Transactional attorneys, a lot of times there's not as much concern about your background. The reason is because once you learn that skill, you're not so much evaluated on your grades and law review, clerkships, and that sort of thing like a litigator is. But if you have a very good ability to do research and writing, you're not going to really know until you're out a couple of years. But most people are either gravitate towards two types of work. So some people are very good at really gravitate towards reading and writing, and other people gravitate towards math and science and things like that. And really, when it comes down to transactional versus litigation, the people that do the best at transactional work tend to be the math and science type people, and the people that do the best at litigation tend to be the reading and writing people. And you have to decide what's interesting. As a litigator, you sit down and you research and you write, and that's all you do. As a transactional attorney, A lot of the work is very detail-oriented. It's very complex, clerical work sometimes, but it's dotting and it's finding connections and it's puzzles and things like that. So it's both types of work are fun, but both require different skills. And you may gravitate towards one or the other. And whatever one it is you're gravitating towards is really probably where you're going to have the most luck, because if you do a job and you're happy doing it, you're always going to do well. And it doesn't really matter the prestige of the law firm you start out at. If you can provide really good service to clients and you can continue to improve, then you'll do well. And so that's how I'd recommend going at that. You have to think about what's most interesting to you. The other thing is, as a one out, you have no idea like what kind of job offers you're going to get. When you apply to firms, you don't tell them you want to be a corporate attorney or a litigator. You just say, I'm applying, because you don't know what you're interested in yet. So I really wouldn't worry too much about it. And the other thing I would say too is during recessions and during bad economies, transactional law is actually the least in demand, because companies aren't spending money, but people sue because they want to recover money that they lost when the economy was bad. Okay, next question. I'm a second-year banking and finance associate in Los Angeles. Great practice area. I'm currently interested in switching practice groups to real estate. Can you briefly explain what my options are for making this transition? What is the outlook of someone in my position? Okay, so right now, banking and finance is actually a very good practice area. I don't know what it's going like where you're at, but banking and finance always does very well before there's a lot of bankruptcies, because banks get involved. That actually is a very safe practice area you're in right now because of what's going on in the economy, and will probably be safe for the next couple of years. But if you do want to switch to real estate, it is a good practice area as well. I would first try to do that in my own firm. There's a presentation, or not a presentation, but I probably should do a presentation on it. But there's several articles I've written about switching your practice area. You're better off trying to do that in your own firm. Your firm's probably not going to be that receptive to it because of how busy banking and finance is at the moment. And I don't know what your reasons are for transitioning to real estate exactly, but real estate in LA is traditionally a very good practice area to be in. There's just always lots of real estate work. The problem with real estate right now, though, is there may be some issues in it. The leasing activity is way down. A lot of values of buildings and stuff are going down. So that's may be increasing refinancing activity, but it's not necessarily increasing sales activities, people holding on to things. So your best way of transition would be in your own firm. If you're at a good firm, which I'm assuming if you're doing that practice area, you probably are, it's not unheard of for you to be able to switch, but I would try to get exposed a little bit to that practice area by joining bar groups, which you're not going to have any in-person interaction right now, but by getting involved in that and doing anything else you can possibly to meet new people and understand why you're interested in real estate. Sometimes people are interested in real estate because they want to start real estate businesses in the future. That's certainly a possibility, but I would be concerned about why you're doing that. And because you're in banking and finance, that's just a very good practice area right now. The most important thing for young attorneys, especially, is to be in a position where they have stability and where you're getting training. And you can certainly, hopefully, ask for real estate work in your own firm and apply to real estate jobs. But you have to realize that leaving a position right now that looks fairly secure for one where there's some question about stability would be something that I would recommend against. You probably could move to a better firm doing banking and finance right now because there's so much demand for it. And if that firm has a real estate practice, you could start taking work doing that as if your current firm doesn't, but those would be the kind of the ways I would think about it. And I'd be very careful about switching practice areas. Those are both transactional practice areas. So like I talked about earlier, one is, they're both kind of math and science type practice areas compared to litigation. So there's not a ton of difference substantively. The work is obviously completely different, but the thought process is very similar. So I'd just be careful. Okay, let's see. Okay, I'm interested in part-time position with a family law firm. I would be interested in contract work as well. Now, what is the hourly rate for family law contract attorneys in Los Angeles? The hourly, if you don't have any experience in family law, it really depends. It could be anywhere from, $15 to $100 an hour. It just depends on the firm. If you don't have any experience and you just want to do part-time, it's probably somewhere between $25 and $40 an hour. And by the way, like I said, family law is very busy right now. If you have any type of litigation experience, I think you could probably find a job at a family law firm now. Okay, from last week, how can we improve the people that we surround ourselves with in order to get more people, more ambitious, better ideas, people to help us progress? So The way to do that really is to just find groups and stuff to associate with and get yourself on committees and things. And so there's different bar association groups. There's people that are doing things within your own firm. Ask people that are successful to have lunch and go out with them and meet them and ask them questions. Informational interviews, just trying to, but even your own friends, who do you choose to spend your time with? Those are all very important questions. The better you do with that, or the more the types of people like that you can surround yourself with, the better. But yeah, the people you surround yourself with are extremely important. Okay, let's see. I read your article on appealing to law firms by becoming desirable. I thought you gave some great advice, and I believe your proposition stands true in many facets of my life, in facets of life now in law firms. I write to ask you for advice on how recent graduates should approach the job market. I'm a first-generation lawyer and recently hit the New York bar in July. I'm currently looking for jobs. I would appreciate any advice you can give me on how it can make me most desirable in the circumstances I'm faced with, so that I can appeal to law firms engaging in corporate, real estate, and tax work. Should I approach the same methods of desirability you speak about? If so, how should I overcome the minimal leverage I may have against the lateral hire? What is it that corporate law firms, transactional law firms are looking for in a freshly graduated attorney? And what is it that I should do to get noticed and get opportunities for interviews? Okay, so the first thing is you took the New York bar, so I'm assuming, rightly or wrongly, that you're in New York City. So New York City is a great market from the perspective that there's lots of firms, but it's also, there's lots of people that are competing for the same jobs. It's a very difficult place to get a position in. Many times you're better off looking on Long Island or in upstate New York or in the center of the state or different parts of the state. That makes the most sense, and that's what I would recommend. But the most important thing is if you just graduated from law school, you need to get experience. And so you need to apply to as many places as you can. And right about now is when you should start trying to find a job. You need to apply to pretty much every potential employer you can around the state. Keeping in mind that transactional work right now is there's just not as much of it as there typically is. And making sure you open yourself up to other cities outside of wherever you are is the most important thing. Attorneys always need to be able to look at multiple markets, and the more markets you look at, the better off you're going to be. And if you do, of course, there's no leverage against a lateral hire. Employers actually have a lot of leverage, or you have a lot of leverage because you can work inexpensively. I would do whatever you can to get in. I have lots of advice, again, on the or.com site, and there's videos about how to find firms and so forth, and I would look at those. But I don't think you'll really have too much trouble. Again, I would open yourself up to potentially work in other practice areas other than corporate or transactional stuff. But if that really type of work appeals to you the most, then I would do that. Okay, let's see. Hi, I'm a first-year associate in a major firm's restructuring group. Congratulations, that's actually great. I'm thinking about my future as a potential lateral at some point in my career, but had some concerns about my GPA. I graduated with 3.47. Is that going to be negative for potential lateral hire? I know some firms have GPA cutoffs. No, you are not in trouble. That's actually a great point. If you're at a major firm's restructuring group, you can probably move to an even better major firm right now. Law firms care more about your experience when you're out of law school. So I wouldn't certainly think about moving right now, but honestly, you probably could because the market for bankruptcy attorneys is very good. I would work very hard and get very good experience. Bankruptcy is going to be busy for a long time. And law firms do have GPA cutoffs, of course, but in most cases, they really do not care that much about them once you get out. There's some firms we talk about are like Sullivan Cromwell is going to have a great cutoff, but most firms do not. And some of the greatest firms do, but honestly, if you were able to get into a really good firm already, then you should be okay. Okay, let's see here. You guys can just keep answering questions. I got more time here. So let's see. One theme that's been mentioned in your recent talks is the importance of showing someone hiring and interviewing you will stick with the job long term. How does that balance the advice I have sometimes heard that an interviewer may ask, do you have any questions for us? It's good to ask about growth paths, opportunities for advancement, etc. Do you think that is particularly bad or would sound like the interviewer like I'm not happy or accepting the job being offered? So there's another article I wrote. It's on harrisonbarnes.com. And it's called, how to ask, do you have any questions, or how to answer, do you have any questions, or questions or something like that. But the big thing is that you do want to ask, the biggest question to ask is what's a typical day? What makes people successful here? And not ask questions that kind of put people on the defensive. And then when they do ask, when someone does talk about like a typical day, then you act enthusiastic, and then you maybe ask some follow-up questions about that. So that's a textbook way to answer that question. But you always want to ask questions, and it is important. If you don't ask questions, it makes it seem like you're not interested. Anything you can do to connect with the employer and not put them on the defensive. Saying something like what makes this firm special or something is, honestly, in a lot of cases, they don't know. It is not a good question a lot of times, but yeah, hopefully that helps. But yeah, read the article I suggested. The biggest question, only thing to remember when they ask, do you have any questions? You ask about the typical day. You ask what makes people successful. What kind of things would be good for me to avoid doing? Things along, or what is, but not asking necessarily about the growth path can make people a little bit uncomfortable. If you do a good job wherever you're at, there's always a growth path. Okay, let's see. I've been a general counsel for a $2 billion publicly traded global manufacturing companies. Oh, two companies. Okay. In the past decade, I've been the director of compliance and ethics for another $2 billion publicly traded global manufacturing company. Due to the company's financial troubles, my role was eliminated at the end of January. Given that it's been a decade since I've been a GC, should I focus on compliance roles, inclusion GC roles? I think compliance right now is actually a very good practice area to do. And I would, anything that's more recent experience is obviously going to be more marketable than something that's not. I would recommend focusing on that. That would be how I would approach that. So I hope that helps. Okay, let's see. I graduated from law school last year and I passed the California bar. Congratulations, hard exam. So I was able to get a job working in litigation, but I really like to work in-house for a tech company because I like working in tech transactions for a legal case. When is the right time to make a move? If you have, I'm currently working in a mid-sized firm. If you currently have a position you feel like you're secure in that job, then I would recommend staying there for a while. Tech transactions are something that are probably going to be slowing down to some extent in the near future. And practice areas are actually very difficult to learn. One of the things I would say is a lot of times when people don't like doing something initially, it's just because they're at a learning stage and they're learning everything there is to do about that practice area and they may not like it. I don't know why you like tech transactions. If you want to work in-house, then you certainly can try a job like that, but just keep in mind that you currently have one type of skill and that may be something that you want to think about. But if you do want to make the transition, you can apply to jobs, you can get involved in the tech community in whatever city you're in. If you're in LA or the Bay Area, there's tons of tech groups and so forth, and you can start meeting people that way. That's actually, tech transactions can be a very good practice area, but it's always very difficult to switch practice areas, which is my advice. Can you also teach us about networking successfully? Yes, I have articles on BCG about networking, harrisonbarnes.com, and I've also done a presentation on networking. It's on or.com, so you can find that. I'm interested in transitioning into a new practice area. Which practice area is currently in demand and will likely in demand for the next few years? Currently, I practice criminal defense, and I'm open to anything that has a potential of a high salary. The best practice area right now, if you have litigation-related experience, which criminal defense is, would be family law is just going bonkers all over the country. We actually didn't used to make family law placements in our company, but now we do all the time. So that's a very good practice area for you to be involved in. Okay, let's see here. And then other practice areas are bankruptcy, would be consumer and corporate are good, but those are, and then just general litigation is actually doing okay. Can you throw some light on salary negotiation for a lateral hires ensuring we're moving from big law to an AmLaw 100 law firm effort? Yeah, salary negotiation, you have to be careful, but you definitely can negotiate salaries. In most cases, you want to be paid what other attorneys in your class year are being paid. And that's really the thing to ask for. If there's a reason that they're not doing that, then you need to ask them. But that would be the nice thing about AmLaw 100 law firms when you're moving from another big law firm to them is that they typically do have fairly straightforward salaries and so forth. And so you always want to negotiate to that. There definitely is negotiation room though with most law firms and salaries. There's not a lot. It's typically somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 10%. You can negotiate salaries, of course. But you need to be careful because you don't want to leave the wrong taste in people's mouth. You're better off going there and working hard and negotiating later. If they're offering you a job that pays less, then you need to be careful. But otherwise, I think you're okay. Let's see. If you're getting an offer at a firm for money that's less than you're currently making, you need to be careful. You don't need to, you can always tell them what you're making and ask them if they can match it. Okay, your recommendations on doing the right thing worked a lot for me. However, we still get emails from people who are who are long-term in that job and assume authority that these emails are with the wrong attitude or not right. Should we confront the email politely or ignore this? It's generally, I think your question, says your recommendation doing the right thing worked a lot for me. However, we still get emails from people who are long-term in that job and assume authority. These emails are with the wrong attitude and not right. Should we confront them on an email politely or ignore the same? Generally, you're better off ignoring negative emails. That's really, anytime someone says something negative to you or something, you're better off ignoring it. It's not something I do certainly all the time, but it's the best thing. Okay, a couple more questions and then we're done. Apart from U.S. markets, apart from the U.S., which markets have a good pay scale for lawyers? In the U.S., which jurisdictions have a good pay scale for lawyers? Such as New York. As a law student, whether changed from Stern to Columbia Law School should be preferred. All right, the best paid areas are the ones in the largest cities typically, but the large law firms, almost sometimes regardless of where they are, have large salaries. Pretty much it's the largest law firms that have the largest salaries, not necessarily the largest markets. Okay, what would be law school rank for Arizona Law School, Georgetown, Hawaii Law School? I don't know those rankings. If one is a PhD at a top business position, do law schools admit such candidates for a JD without LSAT as an exception? And the answer to that is, I don't think so, but you'd have to check. All right, so thank you for being part of the webinar, and I will talk to everyone next week.